Hello, what time is it where you are right now? Type the hour in the comments.
I got the call around 11:30 in the morning, sandwiched between two back-to-back Zoom meetings. The number popped up as private, which I usually ignore, but something told me to pick it up this time. A woman's voice, stiff and overly polite, let me know that my coverage had been officially denied. Just like that. No warning, no apology, not even a damn pause to let it sink in. I asked her to repeat it, thinking I must have misheard. She didn't. I asked her why. She read a script. I asked her what I was supposed to do now. She paused and then said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you'll need to consult with your plan administrator." I hung up without saying anything else. My stomach turned over like I'd swallowed bad seafood. I'd gone to the ER a few weeks ago with chest pain so bad I thought I was dying. I'm 38, reasonably healthy, don't drink much, no history of anything major, but it felt like a brick was sitting on my ribs. The doctors had done a bunch of tests and scheduled a biopsy for what they found on the scan. Nothing was confirmed, but the tone in their voices made me nervous. Now I didn't just have to worry about my health. I had to figure out how to pay for a procedure I might not survive long enough to need. I stared at the wall for a while. The afternoon sun was coming through the blinds and slats that cut across my kitchen table, which still had a mostly empty mug of coffee sitting on it. My inbox pinged again and again. Work crap. I didn't move. I didn't even feel like crying. I just sat there in that cheap wooden chair, thinking about how I was supposed to find 12 grand by Friday, and whether this was going to be one of those defining life moments that people talk about in books and movies. You know, the rock bottom stuff. Except mine didn't feel like a dramatic freefall. It felt more like getting smothered by a pillow slowly with no one else even in the room to witness it. About 2 hours later, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't private. It was Carly, my sister. I didn't answer. The screen lit up with her name and a preview of the text. "You're not gonna believe what Mom and Dad did." 3 exclamation points. I sighed and opened Instagram instead. And there it was, a full-blown surprise birthday party. For Carly, with a private chef, a catered bar, monogrammed cocktail napkins, and what looked like a 3-tiered fondant cake shaped like a Birkin bag. The kind of event you see on wedding blogs. My mom looked airbrushed in the photos, holding a champagne flute, smiling like she was in a commercial. My dad was laughing in the background, wearing a pressed polo and those loafers he only busts out when guests come over. Carly was front and center, wearing some new designer thing, probably a gift. Her caption was, "Truly the best night of my life. Thank you for everything, Mom and Dad. I am so lucky." Yeah, no shit. I wasn't invited. I hadn't even known it was happening. I scrolled through the comments. "So gorgeous. You deserve it, babe. OMG the details." I guess what stung the most wasn't the party. It was that nobody thought it would matter that I wasn't there. Like I wasn't even a possible invitee. Like I'd just quietly disappeared from the family orbit and nobody noticed. I went to the fridge and pulled out the last mini bottle of cheap rosé from that variety pack I'd bought during my divorce, sat on the floor, stared at the one dying plant in the corner, toasted to nothing in particular, and drank it straight from the bottle. I don't know how long I sat there like that. I kept thinking about the call from earlier. How when the woman said declined, it was so clean, so final, like I was just another transaction that didn't go through. Not a person with a life. Just a code in a file that didn't get approved. I must have spaced out because the next thing I remember was my email pinging. I checked it, not expecting anything. And there it was. Subject line, filed. It was from Eli, my lawyer. The email was short and to the point. "Rachel, just confirming that the documents were filed this morning. Let's talk Monday. E." I stared at it for a long time. I'd forgotten today was the day. I'd started this process a couple of months ago when I first realized something didn't smell right with my insurance denial. I'd called Eli because he was the only person I knew who wouldn't try to talk me out of it. And quietly, while nobody else in my life had a clue, we'd pulled together documents, emails, letters, phone records, and now it was real. I had filed a lawsuit against the insurance company, the same one my dad had partial financial ties to through his old investment group, the same one that denied me care, the same one that might be about to regret underestimating me. And I hadn't told a single soul in my family. Would you have, honestly? What would you do if your health was collapsing and your family didn't even notice? If they were out there throwing parties while you were trying to figure out how to not die alone with a pile of medical debt? Would you call them, cry to them? Or would you file the lawsuit and let the papers do the talking? That night, I looked through Carly's birthday post one more time. I screenshotted the picture of the cake, the one with our parents behind her, beaming like they'd just sent their kid off to college. I stared at it, not because I needed proof, but because it reminded me of something I didn't want to forget. The way people can look right at you and not see you at all. I saved the image in a folder I labeled Evidence, poured myself another drink, and started drafting an email to Eli. This time, I had a few more names I wanted him to look into, starting with my dad's old business partner. I don't know where this is going yet. I just know I'm not going to let them pretend I don't exist anymore. Carly was always the one they smiled more for, the one they paused for mid-conversation to adjust her little hair bows or clap at her off-key piano recital performances. I used to tell myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was just sensitive or too quick to count slights as proof of favoritism. But the thing about growing up like that is it leaves you constantly second-guessing your own reality, doubting your own hurt, like maybe you were the problem all along. That's how they get you, by making you feel like you should be grateful for being included at all, even when you're clearly being kept at arm's length. It wasn't one thing, not one event, but a long, slow drip of being overlooked that started when we were kids and never really stopped. I still remember Carly's 8th grade graduation, the way Mom brought roses, a camera, and an entire folder of printed family photos to show her teachers. When it had been my turn a few years earlier, I got a ride to the ceremony and a pat on the back before they left early to beat the traffic. They never said outright that she was the favorite. They didn't have to. It was in the little things. The way Dad's eyes lit up when Carly walked in the room. The way Mom always asked me how work was going, but never quite remembered what I actually did. Carly was easier. She fit into the life they wanted to present. She smiled on cue, married well, stayed in shape, threw themed baby showers for her friends, and joined a wine club. She was good at pretending everything was fine, which is exactly what they valued most. After the party photos went up, I waited a few days to see if anyone would reach out, not even a "sorry you couldn't make it," which of course implied that I'd been invited or considered or even mentioned. Instead, I got silence. I started typing a text to Mom more than once. The first version just said, "Hey, why didn't you invite me to Carly's party?" Then I deleted that and tried something more diplomatic. "Looks like Carly had a great time, would have loved to be there." I deleted that one too. I even called at one point and let it ring until voicemail, then froze. I didn't leave a message. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, it's your other daughter. Just wanted to confirm that I no longer exist." I talked to Leah, my best friend since college, because I had to say it to someone out loud, or I was going to start screaming in the middle of the night. We sat on her back patio while her golden retriever flopped between us, panting in the heat. I told her about the denied claim, the party, the lawsuit, all of it. She listened without interrupting, eyes narrowed like she was filing every detail away for later. "You ever think about just confronting them?" she asked, sipping her iced coffee like she wasn't suggesting dropping a live grenade in the middle of my family's fragile, unspoken peace treaty. I shook my head slowly. What would be the point? I've brought stuff up before. It always turns into me being ungrateful or difficult. "Okay, so sue them?" "It's not their names on the paperwork," I said, though part of me wondered what would happen if it had been. "It's the insurance company, not them." "But your dad's connected to it," she said. "He was on the board or something, right?" "He was an early investor through a private group. I don't know how involved he still is." Leah looked at me for a long time. "Do you want them to know about the lawsuit?" I hesitated, then said the truest thing I'd said all month. "I don't know what I want. I just know I don't want to be invisible anymore." Later that night, I went through some old boxes in my closet and pulled out a folder of family photos. Carly and I at the beach. Carly blowing out birthday candles. Carly opening Christmas gifts while I smiled beside her, hands empty. I stared at one photo for a long time, both of us at Dad's 60th birthday party, taken just a few years ago. Carly's in the center, holding a toast. I'm cut off on the edge of the frame, mid-blink. It hit me how perfectly that summed things up. Always there, never centered. I emailed Eli, my lawyer, and asked if he had any updates. He replied the next morning saying he'd uncovered some communications between the insurance company and the hospital that didn't quite line up. We might be looking at more than just a denied claim, he wrote. Could be negligence, possibly even bad faith. I reread the email 3 times, each time feeling a mixture of vindication and rising dread. Because if this turned into something real, something big, I knew it would drag everything out into the light. And part of me wanted that. But another part of me, the part still craving a sliver of parental approval, that part was terrified. Around that same time, the collection notices started arriving, big envelopes with red lettering, each one colder than the last. I couldn't open them all. I stacked them in a drawer and tried not to look at the total amount. I made minimum payments where I could, skipped a couple of utility bills, canceled the one indulgence I had left, my Hulu subscription, and sat in the dark some nights just thinking, not planning, not problem solving, just sitting, feeling everything and nothing all at once. One night, while staring at the flickering street lamp outside my window, I found myself wondering what Carly would do in my situation. Would she have called our parents? Would she have been swept into some miracle fund or quietly taken care of? Would they have stepped in, flown her to a specialist, paid for everything without blinking? And if so, why not me? The thing is, I wasn't always this bitter. I didn't start out angry. I spent years trying to be understanding, to make peace with the fact that not all families are equal, not all love is fair, and that sometimes people don't love you the way you need. But something about that party, the cake, the photos, the fact that no one thought I'd even care, broke something. And once it's broken, there's no going back to pretending it was whole in the first place. I haven't told them anything yet. Not about the lawsuit, not about the bills, not about the nights I lie awake with chest pain, wondering if the next denied letter is going to be for something even more serious. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by staying silent, but I do know this. They've built their lives on pretending everything is fine, that problems don't exist if you don't say them out loud. Maybe it's time I spoke in a language they understand. Paperwork, lawyers, and very expensive consequences. There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful, not the comforting kind you fall into when everything's been said and you're simply existing in the same space as someone you trust. This silence has sharp edges. It hovers between you and other people, growing heavier the longer it stretches on, the more it collects all the words you don't say. I lived in that kind of silence with my parents for years, tiptoeing around hard conversations, pretending I wasn't drowning just so they wouldn't feel mildly uncomfortable. And now here I was again, hurting, angry, broke, and scared, but keeping it all in because breaking that silence would mean admitting that it had never protected me to begin with. It had been over a week since I got the call from the hospital, and in that time, I hadn't spoken to my mom or dad once. Carly had texted me a video of her dog wearing a party hat, with the caption, "Still recovering from the bash," and I stared at it for a solid minute before deciding not to respond. What was I supposed to say? Glad you had fun while I was figuring out whether I can afford to stay alive? I didn't trust myself not to let the bitterness leak through, and even though part of me wanted to burn everything down just to make them feel 1% of what I felt, the bigger part still wanted to keep the illusion alive, that I could be okay, that I didn't need them, that they didn't hurt me as deeply as they actually did. I kept my head down at work, grinding through tasks like a machine, saying all the right things in meetings, hitting deadlines, nodding at the right times. Nobody knew what was happening behind my Zoom smile, and I didn't offer it up. I thought about talking to HR about the mounting medical debt, but I couldn't stomach the idea of laying my life bare to people who only knew me as the woman who brought homemade banana bread to the last staff retreat. At night, I took long walks through my neighborhood with a podcast in one ear and my lawyer's voice echoing in the other. Eli had called twice in the last few days, and during our last conversation, he told me he'd uncovered something I needed to see. Apparently, in the insurer's internal communication, emails obtained through his contacts and a former underwriter, there was language suggesting they knew my biopsy was medically necessary, but had flagged it for administrative review due to legacy exposure, which sounded like corporate doublespeak until Eli broke it down. Basically, their algorithm had linked my file to an old investment structure, and my name had triggered a deeper look, most likely because of my father's historic financial involvement. I asked him what that meant in plain English. He paused and then said, "It means they hesitated on purpose, not because of your health, because of who you are, or more accurately, who you're related to." I hung up the phone after that call and stared at the ceiling of my dark bedroom for what felt like an hour. I didn't cry, I didn't move. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a simmering kind of disbelief, the kind that turns into fury if you poke it too long. They hadn't just denied me care. They'd profiled me, seen my name, and made a calculated decision that I wasn't worth the cost or the potential noise. And that noise was exactly what I intended to make. But even with that clarity, I still hadn't told my parents, not a single word. I had this fantasy, one I clung to like a security blanket when everything else felt like it was unraveling, where I'd send them the court documents with a sticky note that simply said, "Since you never asked how I've been." Maybe it was petty or maybe it was justice, depending on how you saw it. Either way, I wasn't ready for the fallout, and I wasn't naive enough to believe they'd take it well. What would they say if they found out I was suing a company tied to their financial portfolio? Would they call it betrayal? Would they turn it into another example of me being dramatic, too emotional, not appreciative enough of the life they provided? Because that's always how they framed it when I spoke up, as me being ungrateful, not understanding how hard they worked to give us a good life, even though what that usually meant was a beautiful house filled with silence and conditional affection. Sometimes I imagine the conversation playing out. My dad would go quiet, jaw tight, his disapproval radiating through the phone. My mom would sigh loudly, maybe throw in a wounded, "Why didn't you come to us?" And I'd laugh, not because it was funny, but because it would be so perfectly absurd. Why didn't I come to them? As if I hadn't spent years trying to be heard, only to be patted on the head or redirected back to Carly's newest milestone. They only noticed me when I failed in a way that made them look bad. Never when I succeeded on my own. Leah called that night. She always had the sixth sense about when I was about to spiral, and I didn't even have to say anything when I picked up. She just asked, "Still no word from them?" I said no. "You still not telling them?" I said no again. "Then what are you doing?" I didn't answer right away. I watched headlights crawl across my ceiling from a passing car and let out a long breath before finally saying, "I think I'm waiting." For what? For the right moment. For something to change. For them to notice. There was a pause and then she said, "Rach, they're not going to notice. They've built their entire world around not noticing. You either break it open or you stay on the outside. That's the choice." I knew she was right, but I also knew that breaking it open would mean losing whatever thin thread still connected me to the idea of having a family. It wasn't about money or lawsuits or even the medical bills anymore. It was about the decades of not being chosen, not being prioritized, not being loved in the way that actually matters. And the worst part? I still wanted it, still wanted them to look at me and see someone worth fighting for. That night, I wrote a letter I didn't send. It started with, "I thought about telling you what's been going on, but then I remembered every other time I've tried, and how those conversations ended." I wrote about the party, about the phone call from the hospital, about the lawsuit. I wrote about Carly's cake, and the moment I realized I wasn't invited. Not because they forgot, but because I wasn't part of the image they wanted to project. I wrote until the anger gave way to exhaustion. folded the letter, and slipped it into my drawer, next to the unopened collection notices. I didn't know if I'd ever send it. I didn't know if I'd ever get the apology I wanted, or if it would even matter if I did. But I knew this. They would find out eventually. And when they did, it wouldn't be because I asked for their help. It would be because their name showed up in court papers, attached to the company that saw my life as too complicated, too risky, too connected. And maybe, just maybe, that would be the first time they finally looked at me and saw something real. On Wednesday morning, while I was sitting on hold with the electric company trying to set up a payment plan that wouldn't completely screw up the rest of my month, I stumbled across a video of the private chef from Carly's party. He was trending on TikTok, some high-end guy who specialized in intimate luxury dining experiences, whatever the hell that meant. And there he was, flambeing scallops in a gold-plated skillet, while Carly clapped in the background like a guest on a cooking show. The comment section was full of people tagging their friends and planning imaginary birthday parties they'd never afford. I watched the video twice, not because I cared about the food, but because I couldn't get over how normal they all looked. My family, my sister, even my mother, laughing like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong, like there wasn't a version of their own blood sitting in a dim apartment a few miles away, knee-deep in medical debt and eating peanut butter on crackers for dinner. It wasn't just the party. It was the way it was broadcast, like a perfectly curated lifestyle brand. No acknowledgement of the people not in the frame. No mention of me. And as I watched that clip loop again and again, I realized something that made my stomach twist. Not only had they not invited me, they hadn't even considered how it would look. Because they never think of me at all. That's what stung. Not the exclusion, not the lobster risotto or the vintage champagne, but the absence of thought. The total invisibility. I opened my laptop and pulled up Eli's last email. He'd mentioned setting up a strategy call later in the week, said there were new documents I needed to see. I texted him instead, told him I wanted to talk that night, and to please bring everything he had so far. He replied within minutes, saying he'd swing by my place around 8, and for once, I felt something close to control. I couldn't force my family to see me. I couldn't make the cancer scare go away, or erase the $1,000 bills piling up on my kitchen counter, but I could do this. I could pursue this lawsuit, and maybe, just maybe, I could drag some of their indifference out into the daylight, where they couldn't ignore it anymore. Eli showed up in his usual disheveled way, looking like he'd just walked out of a deposition or a bad date, possibly both. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than me, and a stack of manila folders that made my breath catch. We sat at my kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner I'd been meaning to fix for months, and he laid everything out like we were playing poker. "This isn't just a denied claim," he said, flipping through documents. "It's negligence, maybe even discrimination, depending on how far this goes." I raised an eyebrow. Discrimination based on what? I'm white, educated, insured. At least, I thought I was. He leaned back in the chair and let out a slow breath. Based on association, there's a pattern in the internal memos. They flag patients connected to known high-risk financial entities, particularly when those entities have any historic exposure to litigation. Your dad's name is in 2 of the flagged reviews. I stared at him, the words clicking together in my head like some kind of sick puzzle. So, because my father once invested in this company, I got pushed to the bottom of the approval list? Or set aside entirely, they might have assumed you'd be handled quietly, in-house, or not at all. Either way, it's not standard practice and it's not legal. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do with the feeling boiling in my chest. So I'm too connected to be helped, but not connected enough to be worth protecting. Eli nodded grimly. That's one way to put it. We went over the potential strategy, pre-litigation mediation, a formal complaint filed with the state, and if all else failed, a full-blown lawsuit that would likely get messy. Eli warned me that once things moved forward, it would be hard to pull back. Discovery could unearth things I might not want to see. My father's name, old emails, any past attempts to manipulate outcomes. And if the company decided to fight, it could take months, years even. "I'm not looking for revenge," I said quietly. "I just want to be treated like a human being." "You will be," he said, without looking at me. "But you should know this could get personal very fast." I nodded. "It already is." After he left, I sat in the quiet for a long time, looking at the pile of folders he'd left me. I didn't open them right away. I just stared at them like they were a box of old family photographs I wasn't sure I could handle seeing again. Because in a way, that's exactly what they were. Evidence of a system I had grown up around, but never truly understood until now. My father had always played everything close to the chest. He'd never outright boasted about his money, but he made sure we knew who was paying for dinner. He didn't lecture, but he didn't have to. His silence was its own kind of control. I thought about what it would mean if this lawsuit became public, how they'd respond, how quickly the calls would come in, how my mother would cry on cue and ask how I could do this to them, how Carly would side with them without a second thought. And maybe that's why I hadn't told them yet, not just because I didn't want to, but because I already knew how the story would go. I'd be the villain, the unstable daughter, the difficult one, but that was fine. Let them think that. I was done playing the role of the family ghost, hovering quietly in the background while they toasted Carly and celebrated another year of her curated perfection. I didn't need their permission to be furious, or justified, or even just seen. I had the receipts now, the documents, the trail of deliberate decisions that led to my health being sidelined, and I intended to use them. I opened my laptop and pulled up Carly's birthday post one more time. The comments were still rolling in, friends gushing about the decor, the food, the elegance. I scrolled until I saw one that caught my eye. It was from a distant cousin, someone I hadn't seen since our grandmother's funeral. It said, "Looks incredible. Surprised Rachel wasn't there, though." No one replied. I took a screenshot, just in case, because sometimes silence says more than anything else. And when the lawsuit hits their inbox, I want them to feel what silence feels like on the other side. The day the first letter arrived from the legal office representing the insurance provider, I was brushing my teeth over the kitchen sink because the bathroom drain had been backing up for weeks, and I hadn't yet worked up the energy or the money to fix it. The envelope was thick, the kind of weight that made your stomach drop before you even opened it, because nothing good ever comes in a packet like that. I stood there in my socks with one hand still holding my toothbrush, the other shaking slightly as I opened it and unfolded the pages, knowing full well what I was about to read, but somehow still hoping for a surprise ending. There was no surprise, just legalese, an acknowledgement of my claim, a confirmation of representation, and a list of demands from their side that boiled down to the same message I'd already heard loud and clear. They didn't care what was happening to me, so long as I didn't make it their problem. I set the papers down on the table, wiped toothpaste from the corner of my mouth with the sleeve of my hoodie, and poured myself another cup of coffee I didn't want. My heart was already racing, not from caffeine, but from the quiet, crawling panic that had taken up permanent residence in my chest ever since I'd gotten that first call from the hospital. I thought maybe filing the lawsuit would bring relief, that finally doing something, taking action, would calm the storm. But that was a lie I told myself to get through the day. Because the truth is, doing something is just the start of another kind of chaos. It doesn't make you feel better. It just raises the stakes. And somehow, while all this was going on, my family continued living their lives as if I didn't exist. Carly posted another Instagram story the night before, her and her husband doing a wine tasting at some overpriced vineyard outside of town, all soft lighting and curated outfits. The kind of picture-perfect life that plays well to an audience of women who pretend to be happy for each other while secretly trying to outshine everyone around them. My mother left a comment with a bunch of heart emojis, and my father liked it, which, in his world, counted as deep engagement. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, not because I was jealous, though maybe I was, a little, but because it still baffled me how none of them had reached out. Not even once. Not a phone call, not a check-in, not even a throwaway text to ask how I was doing. It was like they'd agreed, silently, to not acknowledge my existence at all unless I forced them to. And that's exactly what I was about to do. Eli called later that afternoon with an update, his voice steady and deliberate like always, like he knew I needed him to be the rock in the middle of the storm. He told me mediation was being scheduled and that the other side had signaled they were open to a financial settlement, which sounded like progress until he explained that they were offering it purely to avoid discovery. That meant they didn't want anyone digging deeper, not into my denial, not into their internal communications, and definitely not into any potential links to my father's old business ventures. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me. They were scared of what they'd find if someone started pulling threads. That's when I knew I had more leverage than I thought. I didn't tell Eli what I did next. Maybe I will someday, if this all blows up the way I suspect it might. But that evening, after the call ended, I poured a drink, opened my laptop, and started looking into the board of trustees for the private health investment group my father used to be part of. It didn't take long. Most of the names were still public, still active, and still very much tied to the same financial systems that had quietly let people like me fall through the cracks. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I kept digging. And the deeper I went, the more I found small connections, old memos, public records, archived press releases. Each one another dot in a constellation I wasn't fully able to draw yet, but was starting to see the shape of. Around 10 that night, Leah called, and I almost didn't answer, not because I didn't want to talk, but because I didn't know how to explain what I was feeling. This strange mix of power and sadness, like I was finally starting to win a war I never wanted to fight in the first place. But I answered anyway, and when she asked how I was doing, I told her the truth. I feel like I'm setting fire to everything, and I don't know if I'll be better or worse when it's all burned down. There was a pause. Then her voice, calm and steady, like she was holding a lifeline between us. Sometimes things need to burn so you can see what was really underneath. Maybe you're not destroying anything. Maybe you're just clearing the way. I didn't respond, not right away, because I wanted to believe that. I really did. But there was still a part of me that wanted the people who made me feel invisible to finally feel what it was like to be erased. I didn't want to hurt them, not exactly. But I did want them to sit in that silence, that absence, that blank space where I used to be. I wanted them to ask why, and I wanted to be the one who chose not to answer. A few days later, I got a notification from an old email account I barely used anymore. One that I listed on an alumni site for our high school years ago. It was a message from someone I hadn't heard from since graduation. A girl who used to be Carly's friend but had always been kind to me in a quiet, understated way. The message just said, "Saw the news. Hope you're okay. Let me know if you want to talk." My heart skipped. The news? What news? I jumped on Google and searched my name along with the company I was suing, and there it was, a tiny article buried in the business section of a regional legal newsletter, noting a developing lawsuit over a controversial denial case. My name wasn't in the headline, but it was in the body, listed clearly as the plaintiff. It had started to leak, not in a big explosive way, but enough that people were noticing. I sat with that for a long time. They were going to find out. My parents, Carly, everyone. And when they did, they wouldn't hear it from me. They'd read it, online, in black and white. Just like I read about their party, their chef, their life. There's something eerily satisfying about symmetry. Not revenge, just the simple balancing of scales. They ignored me. Now I was giving them the same gift. Silence, until I chose otherwise. The knock on the door came just after sunset, when the sky had turned that heavy shade of blue that looks more like a bruise than a color. I had been pacing the apartment in slippers, rereading the same paragraph of an email from Eli for the 5th time, unable to concentrate because my thoughts kept drifting to a memory I couldn't quite pin down. Something from childhood, maybe. A holiday dinner or a school play, where I had stood just outside the frame, forgotten but still watching. The sound of knuckles against the wood startled me out of the loop. For a moment, I thought it might be a neighbor or someone from the building complaining about noise I hadn't made, but something in the rhythm of the knock felt familiar, measured, cautious, the way someone knocks when they know they're not entirely welcome. I opened the door slowly, heart already racing, and there she was, my mother, standing in the hallway in one of her tailored coats and a scarf that probably cost more than my rent, clutching her purse like it might shield her from whatever emotional storm was waiting on the other side of the threshold. Her face looked tired, not in the way people look when they haven't slept, but in the way people look when they've been pretending not to feel anything for too long and finally run out of energy. She didn't smile, she didn't say my name, she just looked at me like she was still trying to figure out if she was angry, hurt, or something else entirely. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. We didn't hug, we didn't touch. We just sat across from each other at the table where I'd been eating alone for the better part of the year, both of us surrounded by silence thick enough to drown in. I waited, because I wasn't going to be the one to speak first, not this time. She looked around, taking in the small apartment, the cluttered shelves, the water-damaged windowsill, and I could almost see the judgment forming behind her eyes. But to her credit, she didn't voice it. I saw the article, she said finally, her voice low, like we were in a library or a church. Your name's in it. I nodded, offering nothing. Why didn't you tell us? I smiled then, not out of joy, but out of something far more bitter. When exactly would you have liked me to tell you, Mom? Before or after the chef served truffle ravioli at Carly's surprise party? She flinched a little, but didn't deny it. Didn't try to make excuses. For once, she just sat with it. And that silence, that was the closest thing to accountability I'd ever gotten from her. I didn't know, she whispered. No, I said, not bothering to soften it. You didn't ask. That landed. I saw it hit her, saw the way her shoulders dropped, saw the way her fingers twitched around the edge of her purse. We stayed there like that for a long while, neither of us sure what the rules were anymore, because we'd never really talked like this. Not honestly, not without the script, not without playing our usual roles. I had written a letter, a long one. Pages and pages I'd poured myself into over the course of several sleepless nights. It sat in the drawer beside my bed, folded neatly and addressed to both my parents. I'd written it before the article went out, before the lawsuit became real in their world. Back when I still thought there was a version of the story where they might actually hear me before being forced to. But I hadn't sent it, because deep down, I knew they wouldn't read it. Not really. They'd skim it, pick out the parts that wounded them, and ignore the rest, just like they'd done with me. Now that my mother was sitting here, across from me in my kitchen that smelled faintly of burned toast and old coffee, I realized I didn't want to give her the letter. I wanted her to ask. I wanted her to try. But she didn't. She just sat there, eyes wet but not crying, looking like a woman who had walked into a storm and wasn't sure which way was out. What happens next? She asked finally. I shrugged. We go to mediation. If that doesn't work, it becomes a full case. And your father? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She knew. She had to know that I had seen the documents, the investments, the quiet fingerprints he'd left all over the machine that had failed me. Whether it was legal or not, whether he'd actively participated or just stood by while others did the dirty work, it didn't matter. He was part of it, just like they had been part of every silence, every omission, every moment they could have shown up but didn't. I didn't want it to be like this, she said softly. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. Neither did I. And then she said something that I'll probably never forget. Not because it was profound, but because it was so naked, so unintentionally revealing. She looked at me, eyes full of pain, and said, "You've always been so independent, Rachel. We just assumed you didn't need anything." I stared at her, stunned by the simplicity of the betrayal. It wasn't malice. It wasn't cruelty. It was convenience. It was easier to believe that I didn't need anything than to face the possibility that I might have needed them and they had failed to notice. It was their way of preserving their own story, of keeping Carly as the fragile one, the one who needed protecting, while I was the one who got left alone because I was strong, as if strength wasn't something I had been forced to develop out of sheer necessity. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say. After a while, she stood up and collected her things. She paused by the door and turned to look at me. And for a moment, I thought she might say something else, something real, but she didn't. She just nodded, and then she was gone. Later that night, I opened the drawer and pulled out the letter. I read it once more under the dull light of my bedside lamp, tracing the sentences with my fingers, like they were the only parts of me that made sense anymore. And then I folded it again, slid it back into its envelope, and tucked it away behind the bills and the legal documents and the hospital receipts. Maybe I'll send it one day. Maybe I won't, but for now, I want her to sit with the silence, just like I did. There's a strange kind of quiet that comes in the aftermath of confrontation, not the kind that feels like peace or closure or anything remotely healing, but the kind that hums underneath your skin like static, reminding you that even though the shouting has stopped, the damage is still there, lingering like smoke after a fire that didn't burn hot enough to reduce everything to ash, but did enough to leave permanent black streaks across the walls. That was the quiet I woke up to the morning after my mother left my apartment. The kind of quiet where nothing had been resolved and no truths had been fully spoken aloud. But something had undeniably shifted, like a tectonic plate grinding slowly beneath the surface, threatening a quake that hadn't yet arrived. Eli called me mid-morning with the tone he used whenever he had news. That wasn't good, but also wasn't catastrophic. That middle-of-the-road, lawyer cadence that makes you feel like something important just happened, but you won't know what it means until much later, if ever. He told me the mediation date had been confirmed and that the opposing side had agreed to initial terms of engagement, which meant the case was now, in every official sense, real and active, and no longer something I could keep tucked away in a folder or a draft email or in the vague future where I didn't have to deal with the fallout. It was happening. It was now. And whatever happened next would be the part of the story people remembered, not the months of silence or the weeks of unanswered texts, but the public version, the legal version, the version that would leave no room for pretending. By noon, the family group chat had exploded, not with support or questions, or even anger directed at the insurance company, but with thinly veiled panic dressed up as confusion. Carly had sent the first message, a single line asking, "What the hell is going on?" followed quickly by a screenshot of the article that had named me and the health group connected to my father's past ventures. My mother followed with a message that sounded like it had been crafted in a panic and then edited to sound calm. "We were shocked to read this. We wish you had come to us directly." My father said nothing. He hadn't said anything since I filed, and I didn't expect that to change now. I didn't reply, not to them, not to anyone. Instead, I sat on my balcony with a mug of lukewarm coffee, staring out at the city that continued to move without me, people honking their horns and walking their dogs and going about their lives like there wasn't a woman a few stories above them, unspooling years of silence, one legal document at a time. It's strange how normal everything feels while your life is being gutted in slow motion. The sky still looks blue, the neighbors still slam their doors, the radio still plays love songs that make you feel like a teenager again until the lyrics catch up to you and twist something inside your chest. I thought about calling Leah, but I didn't want to explain the emptiness I felt, because it wasn't relief, not exactly, and it wasn't guilt either. It was more like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing that even though the hardest part should be over, the jump, the fall, the impact, what comes next might be the most uncertain part of all. There's no way to predict how people will react when you stop playing your part in their carefully rehearsed family theater. Maybe they'll rage, maybe they'll grieve, or maybe they'll just recast your role with someone easier to love. That night, I pulled out my copy of the lawsuit and flipped through the pages. not reading them so much as scanning for something that might feel like a reason, a justification, a sentence that would explain why this had all become necessary. But of course, it wasn't in the paperwork. The reason wasn't in the breach of contract clause or the medical necessity evaluation. It was in the way my name had been treated as a liability instead of a person. It was in the way my parents had chosen champagne and cake over presence and empathy. It was in the silence that followed every call that never came, every birthday that passed without acknowledgement, every unspoken moment when I had needed them and they had simply not shown up. The letter I had written sat unopened in its envelope, still tucked into the drawer next to the receipts and the medical bills and the notes from Eli. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Part of me wanted to burn it, not out of rage, but to make a point that some things don't get closure, that some stories end without resolution, that not all wounds heal cleanly. But another part of me, a quieter part that still hadn't fully given up, wondered if maybe someday they'd come looking for answers. Not because they'd finally realized what they'd done, but because the silence would become too loud to ignore. When I went to bed that night, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the creaks in the old wood above me, the hum of the refrigerator cycling in and out of life, the occasional sound of distant traffic. I thought about my father sitting in his office, reading the court papers with that same blank expression he always wore when something inconvenient threatened the image he had spent his life perfecting. I thought about Carly pacing in her kitchen, phone in hand, already rewriting the narrative in her head so she could stay the victim. I thought about my mother at the edge of my doorway, her eyes wet with something she still didn't have the words to name. And then I thought about myself. Not the daughter, not the patient, not the plaintiff, but just me, a woman who had been taught her entire life to stay quiet, to stay small, to stay polite, and who had finally said something so loud it could not be ignored. They would talk about me now, at dinners, at events, in whispers behind closed doors. I would be the one who made things difficult, the one who brought shame, the one who made noise. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care. Let them rewrite the story. Let them spin it any way they needed to, because I knew the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was finally enough.